Once again, we are glad to have you back. I'm Frederick Douglass Bussey, and you are watching the Power of Lunch podcast. I'm so excited to have our guest for today. I think it's going to be extremely valuable conversation for those of you who are entrepreneurs who are looking to stand out, to be more powerful in your branding and your messaging. But also, I've known this gentleman for a little while, a little over a year now, and I know him to be a very kind and compassionate individual in terms of providing value to other people and working with them. And so I'm super excited to be able to have this conversation with Glenn Rudin, and we'll get started in just a second. First of all, if this is your first time watching the show or your 10th time, if you're watching this on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, I hope that you will subscribe, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel so that we can make sure we can continue to expand our audience and to share this message with more and more people. Also, the group is brought to you by show is brought to you by none other than the Seven Figure Circle $1 Million Mastermind Facebook group, which is our free community for entrepreneurs who are committed to growing their business to 6 and 7 figures and beyond, to be able to create more impact and to be able to create a life of freedom for themselves and the ones that they love. So if you are watching this on Facebook, feel free to hop onto my profile and click on the link below, or just search 7 Figure Circle $1 Million Mastermind to join the group as well. And without further ado, we will get started here in just a second. Once again, this is Power Lunch. Here we go. Welcome back to Power Lunch. Today, our guest is none other than Mr. Glenn Rudin, who is a message master, the message master. He has worked with a ton of global brands. I'm going to allow him to kind of run through that list and share with you as well. Works with organizations as well as individuals who want to be able to build their brand and to continue to stand out from the crowd in terms of their message. Glenn is really glad to have you here today. I'm really glad to have you here today, and we just want to welcome you.
Listen, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm excited. I want to join the 7 Figure Circle $1 Million Mastermind Facebook group. That sounded great, and the intro to your show has got me really all excited. I love that music and that intro. Talk about powerful branding, Frederick. I think you got it all going on with your podcast here.
Well, I appreciate that. I might have been listening in those clubhouse rooms a little bit strongly to you. So, which kind of segues to where we met. I did not know about you before we were connected in the How to Build $1 Million Business clubhouse rooms over a year ago, and those amazing conversations that we had pouring into other entrepreneurs as well. You always have spot on advice, very concise and very tactical, sound information. And you dispense it with such a kindness that I really appreciate, because there are a lot of people that are gurus or experts out there, and they're preaching down to people, and you're never doing that. You know, I really appreciate that about you. Why don't you share with our audience a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
I appreciate that. Appreciate all your kind words. And I think, just quickly before I get into my background, one of the things that I truly detest in the world, not to go off on a tangent, is bullying. And bullying happens in all different places in our world and in our cultures, Frederick. So it could be somebody who's a guru bullying somebody who just doesn't know as much for good reason. They don't have the same experience set and whatnot. So for me, it's really always trying to relate it to a common denominator where everybody feels comfortable that even though they don't know something, didn't necessarily do it well or do it correctly, there's always a nice way of saying it and a not nice way of saying it. And I think, we've both seen that and experienced it. We've seen it on that Clubhouse app firsthand, people who are just rude. And for me, there's just really no place for that in the world. It's hard enough for all of us to get the wherewithal to appear on here or other places. And to think that we're going to be critiqued or bullied, there's just no room for it. So, in terms of my background, it's so interesting when you look back on your career, not that I'm done by any stretch of the imagination, but I've had a really great career that's been focused on product development, on marketing, on sales. And in all these different jobs, all these different functions that I had along the way, all of them have led me to this place where I am now, where I've always been a product development person. I don't know if I'd call myself a guru, but over the course of my career, through a lot of the different places that I've been, I've probably had a hand in developing, manufacturing, importing, and selling probably in excess of 300 or 400 different consumer items. Everything that you can think of, from cosmetics to plush toys to apparel, wearables, light up things, phone accessories, sound toys, all these different things over the course of time through my career. And it was about 5 years ago that I started realizing that we as people are our own products. We choose how we want to develop and market ourselves, how we want to package ourselves, and we either do it successfully or unsuccessfully in the world. And so what I did was I started borrowing a lot of the principles that I had from that product development space and brought them into the personal development space, saying, what if we applied a lot of these different principles? And, if you take a look at it, and I don't get anything great from, from holding up, a particular product, but, the product has got a label on it. It's sitting on a shelf in a store, and someone walks by, they're either attracted to it or not. It can't really speak for itself. I'm sure there's a couple of really snazzy displays these days that enable something to happen when someone comes in proximity to them. But we all have the ability to package ourselves and speak for ourselves. And so that's how it's all kind of come full circle for me. I still do the product development work, but now I also apply those principles to people. So it's a long-winded answer, but it gives you a really good sense for where I come from.
There's so many things that I want to be able to pull on out of what you said, and even initially going back to Clubhouse. But before we do that, let's kind of get a sense of who you are. Who is Glenn? Where were you born? How were you raised? And how did it maybe set the foundation for some of the work that you do today? Were you always interested in how things were being made or talked about? What was Glenn like as a young man?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I hadn't really thought about this in a long time. But I'm going to say when I was a really young child, and I grew up in the New York area. I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey, 10 miles outside of New York City. And so I've always had that New York area energy about me, and cautiousness and aggressiveness at the same time, because anybody who's ever spent any time driving or negotiating being in New York, that if you are passive and you just sit back and wait, you'll be waiting in line for the rest of your life. Same thing with driving. So I've always got that spirit and that energy of being a New York person. But just to get back into that specific, I can honestly remember when I was maybe no more than 8-10 years old, really being fascinated with packaging and bottles. And I never really thought about that, or I hadn't thought about it for a long time, until your question really prompted me to go back to that space in my history and think about it. But I did. I used to look at, how did that label get on there? Who printed that? Simple things like, a label on a prescription, drug bottle, that, you were taking some kind of, medication as a kid, or a cough syrup bottle, or a food product, a box of cereal. How did all that stuff come together? It's got to be some really interesting process that gets that from a piece of paper, from somebody's mind to a piece of paper, and actually manufacture it. And I've always been enamored by all of that. And so it is interesting that I did seek out a career that was heavily involved in product development like that. So great question. I love that. Really insightful.
So growing up, were you your only child, or did you have siblings growing up as well?
I'm the youngest of three. I've got two older sisters. And so I was the prize, at the time that I was, that I was born, not that I'm a million years old, but, we're going to have a son. The family name is going to carry on, that kind of a thing. So yeah, I've got
No
two
pressure.
older sisters that are still around, and being the youngest, in terms of the pecking order, different things in psychologies kind of come along with that, of course.
So I'm curious because you're entered into this entrepreneurship space now. You've had a long career in working with people. Was entrepreneurship something that you were aware of or even curious about at a younger age, or did that develop later on for you?
I honestly think it developed later on. It wasn't something that I even saw as a career
Mm,
possibility. For
mm,
me, it was all about when I graduated from the University of Maryland and just wanted to get a great job working for a Fortune 500 company, which I did. I ended up working for the Sherwin-Williams Paint Company right out of school in a management training program, which was really interesting. Again, involved with consumer products, some slightly different than some of the stuff that I ended up getting into later on. But, for me, I never really thought about the entrepreneurial stuff as a career. Although I
mm,
will say, as a young guy, a teenager, I was always out hustling,
mm,
shoveling snow in the winter, shoveling other people's driveways after mine was done, to make $10 or $15, painting houses, washing and waxing cars. And so while I didn't really see that as owning my own business or something that I might want to do someday, I always did love and have the ability to create opportunities to make money for myself. So that's some of the things that I definitely learned early on was, hey, you can do things. You don't have to sit back and wait for somebody to give you a job. There
This
we
is my
go to
co-host.
young entrepreneurs.
Yes, this is my co-host who often joins the shows now. People know her, my youngest Alea. So I'm curious,
Leah?
Alea, yes, you you graduated from the University of Maryland. What was your area of concentration and study?
It was business management, and
Okay.
it was listen, as you know, a lot of times, those degrees. Hi, Leah. As you know, a lot of times those degrees are what they are, but it was a good introduction to a lot of different business ideas that did open my mind up to some possibilities. I always liked the idea of economics, and I remember, again, it's going back a bit, but one of these problem solving things in an econ class where
Mhm.
you had to develop a product, and the
Mhm.
product was a pen. And so you had the ability to create a 20-cent Bic pen or a $300, Mont Blanc pen. And then, some different things went into how were you going to make your particular item successful? Were you going to sell a million 20-cent pens, or were you going to sell, 5,000 of those $300, $400 Mont Blanc pens? I always loved that, that ability. So University of Maryland did bring me some of that thirst for some of that knowledge. So that was interesting as well.
I've always been kind of intrigued about how people evolve into their understanding of what it is that they're doing. And even looking back now, did you find that you had certain strengths that you rely on now that maybe you didn't recognize would play such a big factor in your success going forward in your career?
Well, this is really interesting, in terms of that question. At some point after I was in maybe the third or fourth job that I had, and I started to get this sense that maybe I wasn't going to get promoted to be that person in the corner office.
Mm,
Maybe I didn't have the patience to wait around for 14 years until all these different things lined up the way they did. And I was a bit rambunctious as a young person working at, say, Revlon, and not
mm,
necessarily meshing with the management. And I saw different decisions being made that I didn't necessarily respect. And I
mm,
started to develop this attitude that I used to think that people in those corner offices had to be so much smarter, had to know so much more than I did. And
mm,
then over the course of time, as I started to interact with them, I started to realize that there was a lot of luck and happenstance that landed those people in those jobs. It wasn't that they were necessarily the smartest or the most well equipped, but they might have been really, really good at manipulating the politics of what it took to get into those places. So they got into those jobs, not necessarily based on ability, but they're based on ability to manipulate, different personality things that they did to get a promotion. Maybe they deserved, maybe they didn't. And so I started to understand that it was a bit more complex than just show up every day, do a great job, you'll get promoted to this, you'll get promoted to that. Before you know it, you're going to be the VP. And I got a little bit frustrated, maybe too soon, and started to lose my patience. And that was about 3 or 4 companies into it, probably about 10, 12 years into my career. And then I started thinking maybe there's something more to doing this, that it doesn't necessarily have to be me working for a Fortune 500 company.
So once you started making that transition, was it a quick leap where did you pull the parachute right away, or was it something that you started strategically positioning yourself to make a move in a different direction? Or did it take a long time?
Well, this is a really interesting story. So I was working for what I'd call probably a Fortune 1000 company. They were probably doing, there's a company called Applause that doesn't exist anymore. They were, at the time, the preeminent supplier of licensed merchandise from Disney, Sesame Street, Looney Tunes, to what I would call the gift market, the Hallmark stores, the department stores. At that time, you've got a layer there on your lap. At that time, you could walk into a mass market store, a Kmart, Walmart, and you could buy a Mickey Mouse plush toy for $12, or you could go to Macy's or a Hallmark store and buy something that looked very similar. Now, it was made better, it had better materials, it was the same character, Mickey Mouse, but it would be $25 because that was the upstairs, the gift market. And that's the market that Applause traded in. And one of my customers at Applause happened to be the Ringling Brothers Circus. They would buy Disney branded merchandise and sell it on their souvenir stands for their Disney on Ice shows, which they had the license to do. It's a little bit of a long story, but it's really interesting. And they came to the company that I was working for, Applause, and they said, look, we do a lot of this sourcing, but we're looking for a company that we can go to, soup to nuts, that can help us source all this stuff for the merchandise we want to put on souvenir stands for future on ice shows. Do you think Applause would be willing to do that? And so I huddled up with a couple of the other people that were in national account roles with me, and I said, listen, if we bring this to corporate, there's no way in the world they're going to execute it. They're just not nimble enough. They're just not sharp enough or quick enough. And they said, well, what are we going to do? It seems like, there's no other choice. I said, look, I met somebody who I think is really entrepreneurial in spirit. He owns his own company. He doesn't manufacture toys per se, but he's in licensed hosiery and accessories. And I think he might appreciate this opportunity. Give me a couple days. So this is a guy that I had met commuting on the Long Island Railroad back and forth to New York. I took a meeting with this guy and laid out my pitch for what this company could potentially be. And he was a sharp guy. He had good vision. He understood what I wanted to do. And he said, look, I don't know if this is going to work or not. I don't know if we're going to be able to beat the margins that they have because they got their own internal sourcing team. But I'll give you guys 6 months. I'll give you a draw, versus like a commission. And after 6 months, if it doesn't work, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to keep it going. I don't know what'll happen. And I went back and I said, look, this is a risk I'm willing to take, even though I had 2 young boys at home. I was married probably about, 10 or 12 years, had a mortgage, 2 car payments, the whole thing. My wife at the time was not too crazy about this idea, nor were a lot of other people. They thought I was crazy. I was walking away from a good paying 6-figure job. And I said, you know what? I feel like this is a chance. Like this is a real chance to do something really amazing. So we called this client back on Monday morning, said, remember that company that you were looking for last week that didn't exist? It exists now. It's called the Idea Factory, which was a name I came up with. And we're ready to take a meeting with you, Ringling Brothers. And they said, okay, listen, come down and like set up a meeting 3 weeks later. So we went out to the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, and we hired 5 artists right out of their school of toy design. And we basically locked ourselves in a room for about 5 straight days. The real Chinese food boxes and pizza boxes laying on the desks all over the place. And any idea was a good one. You could put any idea you wanted on the board, and we're going to pursue it. And we probably created, Frederick, 300 to 400 different boards that these artists rendered by hand. Maybe some CAD designs, but that wasn't really a big thing back then. So a lot of hand drawings of all these different, some crazy, some tried and true, some standard, whatever. We went down to Ringling Brothers. I think actually they're still based in DC. They still do the on ice shows. The circuses is no longer because it was cruel to animals, I guess, something like that. We had an hour and a half presentation, board after board after board, like all these color boards that we pulled out. Well, this is this thing. This is that thing. We thought this would be a cool idea. We thought this would work. And we did them all with Disney branding on them because that's their thing. So our presentation comes to an end after about 45 minutes, an hour, and there were 3 people there from Ringling Brothers that were the decision makers. Said we need to take like a 15-minute break to discuss what you've presented, and we'll be right back to you. So they leave, and the 4 of us are we're sitting there. How'd that go? Was that good? Was that bad? That we had no idea what the outcome was going to be. Right. And 15 minutes later, they came back into the room, sat down, and said, look, we have good news and bad news, and Fred, you've been in a number of situations like that where you're thinking, you can't help but think the bad news is going to be nice try, but, and it's just really not going to work out.
Right.
And I said, well, why don't you give us the good news first? And I said, listen, we love what you just did. We love this presentation. And we think if you can actually produce the items that you showed us, a lot of them on these boards for the right prices, we're going to have a great partnership. I said, wow, that sounds pretty phenomenal. Obviously, we've got a pretty big challenge ahead of us. What's the bad news? Oh, let me go back. Rest of the good news. We've got Toy Story on ice that's going to be coming out in October. And this meeting was probably in May or June. And we want you to produce all the items for that show. Wow. That sounds amazing. What's the bad news? The bad news for you is we also have a show called Pocahontas on ice that's coming out at the same time. And we want you to produce all the items for that show also. So from nowhere, we now had a ticking time bomb, and we had to produce roughly 300 items that had to be on souvenir stands in El Paso, Texas, where they open their shows to like a BC market in 5 months. And so basically we ran out the door, and probably within a week, I was in China, first time ever, for 3.5 weeks, meeting with factories, sourcing items, doing the very stuff that I really wanted to do for the first time in my life. Beyond exciting. And, without continuing this long-winded answer, because I really have gone on here for a bit, we did hit their deadlines. We had Toy Story product on their shelves for that show opening in El Paso, Texas, when it opened. And I'm talking about really cool stuff with Buzz Lightyear and Woody. All the characters from that show. You've got young kids, so you can relate to that. It was the most successful on ice show they ever had, because how big Toy Story, the first one, was as a movie when it came out, and how it just wowed everybody. It was very much the same on ice, same storyline, same characters, Mr. Potato Head and Woody and, and all those great characters. And we had toys and novelties and shirts and hats and everything you could think of that were done in that likeness. I still have a box of a bunch of that stuff because it's so near and dear to me.
So first of all, that's an amazing story. There's so many amazing elements to it, right? So the fact that you pulled it off in such a short period of time um, is in self intriguing. Also, the fact that you created 400 different drawings. Like most people, when they go to pitch a big deal, they're not thinking we're going to do all of this. They actually may get maybe 5 or 10 ideas down, or pick their best 1 or 2. And you had an hour's worth of presentation, slide after slide, graphic after graphic. What was it that made you say we need to go all in this, like jump both feet all the way up in the water, and really produce at this level to be able to create this presentation?
Well, so you have to think about it like this. For me, and for this guy that was betting on me and these couple other people that were part of this organization, we were pretty exposed. Like I was pretty exposed. I was out there. Like this was pretty much do or die, because Applause was kind of shocked that I just walked away from what they thought was a great job, where they were paying me a really good salary. So there was no going back to them. And I don't in particular remember specifically what the job market was at the time, but I do know, listen, it's still always difficult to be on the outside looking in, looking for a position, and how you're going to explain that. So we were pretty all in on this. I mean, it was like, all the chips to the middle of the table, and make this a reality. And we just felt that we had to show them every last angle that we could possibly think of, so that at the end of the presentation, they realized that we had exhausted everything that you possibly could think of without a whole lot of direction. It wasn't like we were working, but we didn't know that it was going to be Toy Story, where we could potentially create concepts based on Toy Story. We were doing really more generic Disney things than the specific shows we ended up working on. But we were literally all in. All the chips were on the middle of the table for us. We had to make that work. We didn't think it would work quite that well. We thought maybe they'd give us a few things to produce. But when they literally turned the spigot on and they said, you make everything for these next couple shows, it was a pretty intense feeling. I have to say, when we left that meeting, we were pretty high on life at that point, thinking about how great that was. But at the same time, wow, now we actually now have to produce all this stuff, right? So pretty interesting.
What do you remember what that deal was worth at the time?
Oh, millions of dollars. I mean, the thing is, when you really, and at that time, even more so than now, the Orient still had a pretty big curtain on it. The people who knew how to produce things over there that could really take advantage of the labor rates and the per piece production rates really had great opportunities to make a lot of money. And even though we had a business and a company that had their own internal sourcing group, you could still be pretty sharp. And if you were really good at what you were sourcing, and look, they because of the scope of what they do, they're at the time, they were the number one toy buyer in the country. That's the kind of velocity that they did at those souvenir stands. And because they had so many shows going on in so many places, Frederick, they were printing money. Ringling was really printing money for themselves. They probably at any point in time had 15 to 20 of these shows in arenas literally around the world. And because the arenas, I don't know, if you're a big sports fan or not, but you could certainly appreciate, that the United Center, right, where the Bulls play. I'm sorry, what is the let's use the United Center where the Bulls play. So they've got 41 dates, and then you've got the Blackhawks that are probably in the same arena. They've got 41 dates. Well, guess what? There's 365 days in a year, right? How many Bruce Springsteen, Beyonce, concerts are you going to throw in there? So
Right.
they were the number one user of those spaces. And so, they were doing, 10, 15,000 people a show. They were a big player. They were a big player. And so the opportunity to produce a lot of units and do a lot of velocity was amazing. And then if you add to it that it wasn't just some run in the mill thing, it was Toy Story on ice. That ended up being their biggest, on ice show that they ever did because of that brand, because of the Toy Story brand.
So there's a couple of things that come up for me. This is actually fascinating. I could just do a deep dive on this whole part of the conversation because I'm fascinated in all the different elements. So there's a couple of things. One, you'd never been an entrepreneur before, right? So you'd never run a business before. Am I correct? So
Right.
you launched out there with a multi-million-dollar business off of one pitch, but you had to build it. You had partners. So you had to manage your partners, manage a team, manage the process, all of these different things. What was the one thing that you did right that maybe you didn't know that you were really equipped to do at the time? And then on the flip side of that, what was something that, looking back, might have scared you if you'd known about it before, but you didn't know that you just had to learn on the fly?
Great question. Great question. I think that I relied and really learned to rely on my creativity. Not just the creativity to be able to come up with a great name, the Idea Factory, or an interesting toy, which I'm sure, I go back and look at a lot of those different toys, which ones specifically were my ideas, or the creativity to see the vision of that there could be this company that could have these artists, that could have a sales team, that could have a management executive team that would go out and do these presentations. So it's the creative thinking. I think that's what this really taught me more than anything, that if I actually had the resources, I could really tap into my creativity and do a really good job of pulling all these disparate elements together to create something of great value where everybody really felt a part of it. And, the one beauty about, and I'll get back to answer the second part of your question in a minute, the beauty about consumer products, as opposed to things like, I don't know, utilities or services, with those products, you can really hold them in your hand. You can really stand, next to one of these souvenir stands and watch people buy these, or see kids acting with them, in an audience, which would just bring you this tremendous ego and feeling of, wow, that exists, that moment, that special moment with that little kid exists now because of an idea that I had. It's really intoxicating, in terms of being able to do that. I would say that if I was going to look at the other side of that, and the thing that I didn't really anticipate, that I couldn't anticipate at the time, but I learned tremendous lessons from, were the guy that ended up that I went to, who helped us fund this whole thing. Fundamentally, he was a really flawed human being, and he ended up being a really rotten person in the long run. And so while we had tremendous success for a number of years, ultimately his inability to be able to sit back and enjoy the fact that he had helped light the fuse that created something that he owned a majority of, his ego would not let him sit on the side and enjoy that. And so rather than embracing it, rather than feeding it, rather than putting more kindling on the fire and helping grow bigger, his jealousy got the best of him. And he could not stand the fact that other people were doing this and not him. He needed the credit himself. And so I wasn't prepared to manage his ego, and I wasn't certainly prepared to manage his damage as a human being. And so one of the lessons I really learned in life was, you've really got to know a lot about the people that you get in bed with as partners, because just like a marriage, right? Things can go wrong. Things will go wrong. Things do go wrong. And we could do a whole other podcast on some of the horror stories that this guy took me through on the other side of all the success that we had.
That's incredible. It brings to mind because, well, for one thing, when you have partners, that relationship can really go one of two ways. It can either go great or it can go horribly. And then every layer of complexity that you add with different vendors or partners or situations, and so obviously this one was one that was tough for you. Did that situation eventually lead to a segue into kind of what you're doing now, or what was the evolution of this whole situation?
Well, so we that ended up getting dissolved probably about 4 or 5 years down the road, and me and one or two of the people that were part of the Idea Factory that went in there went off on our own, and we formed another successful venture. It wasn't nearly as successful as that because some of those are just whales. There's
Mhm.
very few times that that you really come across or you're able to pitch somebody that big and have it go perfectly well and end
Right.
up with those kinds of orders. And I will say this, that that business of the souvenirs led me, still within that company, to start pitching Universal Studios when they
Hmm.
were opening up their sister theme park in Orlando.
Okay.
And just like the first one, we now use that as a model of success for the second one. And
Hmm.
we ended up being probably 60% supplier to the Islands of Adventure theme park in Orlando. I don't know if you've been there or not over the years, but an incredibly successful theme park. And again, we probably ended up producing close to, I don't know, 150 or 200 items for them under
Wow.
all those different brands, including things like Jurassic Park. I'm trying to think of some of the other properties that Back to the Future, a
Mm.
lot of the Marvel Entertainment characters that were all part of that park. So that was another huge win in this company. And again, and we had other ones beyond that. And again, this person, this guy who owned the company, owned the controlling share, just could not sit back and enjoy that success, could not enjoy the money that came with it. He already had money, and it
Mhm.
was his ego. So really, really interesting that that all of those successes, which were just amazing. And what's interesting is I think about those now, and that
Mhm.
inspired me at this point to go back, and I'm in the process now of building an agency again, where it's not going to be just me, but I'm out there trying to pitch bigger clients in the hope that the Message Master can do that same kind of job that I do for individual people with a team in place for larger, Fortune 1500, Fortune 5000 type
Mhm.
companies.
I love it. I'm curious because I just have one question because we learn different lessons about people, and business is all about people, managing relationships, egos, personalities. Do you think it was the fact that you essentially did something that he could have done had he just had the idea to really go out and pitch these things? Do you think that the jealousy that your partner experienced was really kind of a trigger because of the fact that he had not maybe what's the word I'm looking for? Exploited his own potential, right? And so
I,
you kind of came in and did that.
I think, look, I think that he had a flawed life for whatever reason. We certainly can't get into that now. Um,
Mhm.
but but he was a great success in his own right. He, through his own experience, had navigated to a niche in mass market retailing
Mhm.
where he in his own time had gone overseas and found hosiery suppliers that could produce socks at a great price. And then he was smart enough to go out and get a Disney license, a Looney Tune license, and put them on socks. Now, you know how popular branded socks are today. You've got Happy Socks and all kinds
Mhm.
of licensed socks that are out there.
Right.
But at the time, you basically had black socks, brown socks, and navy blue socks that people had. And all of a sudden, they started doing licensing in the sock area, and they were tremendously successful. But it was a
Mhm.
fairly simple thing, and he had figured out the sourcing from Taiwan and from Korea and a bit from China, and he was making a lot of money doing that. But it wasn't nearly as much fun, it wasn't
Mhm.
nearly as cool as the kinds of things that we were producing as the Idea Factory. Again, when you start talking about toys and you start talking about some of these licenses and light up things and whatnot, there was a lot of fun and notoriety that went along with it. And so he, even though he was separate from us, he so longed to want to be in there and be a part of it. Now, maybe myself and some of the other people that I work with, maybe we should have been more open to letting him in and making him feel like he was more involved in it. I don't know, that looking back on it now, maybe that was a mistake that, that we made. But I just know that, he had his success. This was our success. And for whatever reason, he just could not deal with that. And so he would rather have screwed it up, destroyed it, than let it continue to go. It was really quite an incredible thing. It was so counter to what I thought people were capable of, especially when they were making money in the venture, and a lot of money.
That's fascinating. It's fascinating. As you look at that now and the work that you do, because you segued out of that, you had another company after that, and you started getting into messaging. What was it about messaging that really appealed to you as something that you wanted to focus on in helping people to be able to develop? You've done all this brand work with all these huge brands, and obviously Disney is an amazingly huge brand, Universal Studios, and even the stories that you were working on, so different movies are all different stories and concepts and IP and things of that nature. Was it taking those ideas that maybe you understood because you were working with the products and then translating that to messaging? Like, how did that really evolve? Because going from products to a message is going from taking something that's tangible, and now you're working on something that's intangible in a lot of ways. So how did you make that transition?
Well, it's a great question. About 7 or 8 years ago, this is great for anybody that's listening to your podcast. I headed down to the local small business development center here that's housed on the campus of State University, New York, Stony Brook, which is a great college. That's probably a university about 15, 20 minutes from where I live. A major university, and they do great things there. I went in and I took a meeting with somebody and explained a lot of my background that you and I have just gone through. And this gentleman said to me, you really should go out and do some networking. I'd never heard the term before, Frederick. And I was like, what, networking? You mean like for NBC going to work for a network? What do you mean by that? No. Nothing to do with that. Go out and tell people what you do at, at Chamber of Commerce meetings or, other business clubs, and see, there could be people out there that are looking for your help in product development. And I started doing that really religiously, put my mind to it, said, this is really interesting. It's a great way for me to meet all these people and spread the word about what I do. And as I went to meeting after meeting after meeting, the one thing that I realized over and over again was how poorly prepared people were. And I always use this statistic: 9 out of 10 people just were clueless in terms of their appearance. They were clueless in terms of their elevator pitch, what their unique selling proposition was, what value they really provided. They made the effort to show up at these meetings 7:30 in the morning at a BNI meeting, the kinds of meetings I'm speaking about, and they couldn't put 2 sentences together. And it started to get really frustrating to me because I was showing up also, and I had to listen to this stuff. And I said, wow, this is pretty unbelievable. And one morning, after probably about 6 straight months of going to a particular sales marketing meeting for one of the local business clubs here, this one guy who was a nice guy, and he would always show up like he was dressed to go to in the afternoon to go watch the Cowboy game Thanksgiving afternoon, at Uncle Joe's house, right? And he was a CFO. He was a finance guy. And again, he was dressed in corduroys and in a cutoff sweater, a sweater vest. He didn't look like a CFO. He didn't pitch like a CFO. And one morning, I got into my car. This is the true story. I looked in my rearview mirror and I said, that guy wouldn't do business with himself if he was on the other side of the table.
Mm.
And I said, wait a minute, that sounds pretty good. Would you do business with you? And I said, I think that might ring true to a lot of people. And I endeavored to create a keynote on that, which I still do at universities and business clubs and chambers. And that was the beginning of looking at what does it really take to show up at one of these meetings and really be present, really put your best foot forward. And I started thinking, wow, you know what? People are packages. Maybe I could teach them about how to label themselves in terms of the way they dress. I could teach them how to create an elevator pitch. I have to study some of this. For me, it comes really naturally, but let me get some of the lingo down. Let me understand really what's involved there. And as I did that, I realized that, very much the same as branding and messaging on products, people need to be able to do the same thing for themselves, their products, their services, their companies. And most people, a majority, as I said, 9 out of 10, struggle with some part of that, Frederick. And that became, right into the pandemic, something for me to morph into and really start doing that even more so than the product development stuff, which I still am involved in.
So it's fascinating that you talk about that. Obviously, personal branding is a term that more and more people are aware of, but it wasn't really a thing, probably even when you had started to do this type of work with messaging for people. But what are some of the, if you could come up with the top 1, 2, 3 mistakes that people make when it comes to creating their personal brand, creating a strong message, what would you say?
Okay, so I've got a new what I call a group class that I do, so that if people can't afford to or don't want to work with me individually, it's just not not in their budget. So I've got a group class that I do now, and so it's right now it's 4 segments, and the first one focuses on your appearance, because in my judgment, I use this quote: "Be great in 8." That's be great in 8 seconds or less. That's how long it takes us on a virtual call or in person to look you up and down before you even get a chance to speak. And you're either ready to go with what you're wearing, your intentionality in terms of, we'll get into the personal branding in a second, but your posture, your confidence level, all your energy. All of these things are immediately apparent to every other human being, because look, we're all hunters as human beings. That's just what we are. And we're constantly out there looking, inspecting, trying to see what goes on. So I say, you've got to be great in 8, which means that you've got to show up here on StreamYard or on Zoom, and you've got to be ready to go. The lights go on. There's no time to go, give me a minute, I got to go grab my jacket, or I wasn't really thinking about that, right? You've got to be ready to go. It's lights, camera, action. And when that light goes on, you've got to be ready. So be great in 8. That's the first one that I would say. The next one that I would really, really encourage anybody who's hearing your podcast to do is be intentional with that personal brand. Know, if you don't know what your personal brand is, get to know it. And you can change your personal brand, but it requires the word intention. You have to want to do it. So on my website, there's a personal branding exercise that I have. It's a PDF that's got about 30 to 40 different personal branding adjectives. And you could pick a half a dozen of those and say, going forward, this is how I want to be known, as somebody who's serious, as somebody who's well-spoken, as somebody who's dedicated, as somebody who's creative. These are all words that you would use to describe yourself first and foremost to you, and then get intentional about them, so that when you're done with a meeting with Frederick, he walks away and he says, wow, Glenn's creative. Wow, Glenn's, passionate. Glenn is enthusiastic. Glenn's energetic. These are all positive words that I make sure I'm wearing on my sleeve when I do any meetings that I have with anybody. I'm intentional about it. Now, At this point now, it almost seems like second nature for me, but that's because I've been doing that for a long time. But so many people, you've seen them, Frederick, they show up, they seem tired, they seem bored with what they do. They don't seem to be, quote unquote, into it, right? And so if you're not into what you're doing, how is Frederick or Glenn or anybody else listening going to be into it? So I say those are two really good ones to start with. Be great, innate, be intentional about your personal brand.
I love that as well. Alea loves it. She came back. So you talked earlier, we were talking in the clubhouse about bullying, right? How there are some people who are supposed experts or whatever. And so I wanted to tie this back to the personal branding and the messaging piece of it, because I think you would agree that there are a lot of ways that we communicate things about our brand that are not just in the words that we say, not just in the status symbols that people try to use, whether it's on social media or in real life. Like, so maybe I've got a Gucci wallet and I want to pull that out to impress people, or a Rolex watch, right? So there's all these status symbols that people use. Are there certain things that people are not aware of that are actually more communicative in terms of a powerful or impactful message, things that you leave with people that are above and beyond the logos on your material things, or even the positioning that you think you have with your title? I'm a so-and-so expert. I'm whatever the case may be. Does that make sense?
It does. I think it goes back to that word about being, again, intentional. I think that, number one, let's go back to that question I mentioned earlier, that keynote that I do. Would you do business with you? So we're expecting people to watch this podcast or listen to it. We're expecting when we show up in a clubhouse room, or we go to a Facebook group, or one of these, any number of places, or now we're going to go out live to a Chamber of Commerce, a BNI meeting, a sales meeting, like, the one I'm coming to Atlanta, for in a couple of weeks. And we're expecting people to interact with us in ways that we want them to. And yet, if we're not intentional about what we put out there as our branding, and we're expecting them to do the interpreting for us, there's a real breakdown there in that communication. And for me, that's one of the things that I really love enlightening people about. Look, if you are bored with what you're doing, or if you show up and you're not dressed for your part. Now, I'm not saying everybody's got to be wearing, a blue sport jacket, a button-down shirt. If I'm doing a keynote for a business function, I'll probably even wear a tie. I'll take it that far. But we both know how many times we are on camera with other people, and we see people who look like, frankly, they either just got out of the gym, or they're headed out to the beach for the weekend, and it's inconsistent with what they're doing for a living. And when you create that dissonance, it's not connected, you make it difficult, because now we don't know if we really want to believe in what we're seeing or what we're hearing. And anytime we create that dissonance for people, we start separating them from us. And in my judgment, we are so besieged with so many messages, and we're so distracted, that if you give somebody the opportunity to be distracted by what you're doing, or they don't understand it, just in your appearance, let's start there, let alone even your elevator pitch is confusing, people immediately start to disconnect. See, you know what? This guy doesn't really know what he's talking about. I'm going to tune him out. I'm going to get back to my desk here. I'm working on some Instagram posts and things like that, and opportunity lost. And the same thing happens even in in-person meetings. Now, it's a little bit harder to hide it, but look, we're all carrying around these smartphones, and you could look around a room pretty quickly and see who's disengaged and now looking at their phone messages or their emails that came in, rather than paying attention to the, to the meeting that's going on. So I think, again, it goes back to that, being true to who you are, and not getting bored with who you are and what your message is, so that every single time you show up, you are consistent. the audience that's hearing you is hearing the same song. And I always use this, I always make this comparison. Whether you're a Rolling Stones fan or not, or a Bruce Springsteen fan or not, or Beyonce, these people have all done hundreds, if not Springsteen, thousands, and the Rolling Stones, thousands of concerts over the last 40 years. Well, listen, there's a good chance that when the Rolling Stones do their next show, there's going to be somebody in that audience who's never seen them sing Brown Sugar and or whatever your particular favorite, Painted Black, or whatever song, Satisfaction, that you want to hear them sing. And so they can't get up on stage and do a B performance. You just paid $400 for that ticket. You want to hear them do the same thing that they did when they first started. They don't have the same energy they once had, but they've got to do it as if they're doing it for the first time. And so what I find is so many people get quickly bored with what they do because they've heard it a lot, but they don't realize that somebody in that clubhouse room is hearing it for the first time. You've got to do it like you're doing it for the first time, like it really means something to you and like you're really passionate about what you do. Because if you don't, you're letting yourself down. You're not putting your best foot out there, and people are not hearing the best of you.
No, I love that. The word that comes up for me is professional.
There you go.
In your intention. And I think because people have taken personal branding, and even the day entrepreneurship has, especially with online, you can the idea that you can make money while you're sleeping, you can make money on the beach. People show up like they're on the beach already. A lot of times it's kind of like, oh, nobody's really, and there's almost this. So I know the difference because you were in corporate culture where it was a certain environment and then you stepped outside of that. But I think that there are lessons to be learned about how you can present yourself and your brand and your message at a high level, right? Whether you're a solopreneur, whether you have a small team, and there's too many resources at play, yourself, people who can teach you how to craft a message and things of that nature. You can get a logo done. You can do these different things, but you can work on your product, your package, and be able to present it in a powerful way. And so I love that you position it that way because the idea that you can show up, that Mark Zuckerberg could show up in shorts and t-shirt and build Facebook. And at the same time, when he goes to Congress, that's not what he's wearing. Right.
So some of us do get spoiled by our success. And, there's something to be said for somebody who's, now made $100 million and they want to show up in flip-flops. Now, for me, I feel like if you're showing up and it's going to be a business function, then professionalism, you use the right word in my judgment, Frederick. To me, again, the people are seeing you for the first time. Look, if you've made it and now you've gotten lazy about it, you know what? Leave it to the rest of us. Go out and spend your time doing whatever somebody who has that kind of money has. Go island shopping, not hopping, shopping. Go work on your golf handicap. Go work on your bucket list. But don't set bad examples for the rest of us because of the ego that you had. And that's maybe one of the only knocks. I mean, if you've ever read Steve Jobs' biography, he would show up barefooted, to whatever. I don't remember what his logic was for doing that, but because he was Steve Jobs, he could do it. He could show up in that black turtleneck and jeans because he could do it. Was it the right thing to do? I don't know. Maybe that was the right image for Apple. It needed to be cool and upscale like that. But I don't like you were just saying now, when somebody at Zuckerberg's level doesn't respect the fact that he's made that money on all of us. And I think he owes us the respect that he pays when the only reason he's showing up looking like that to Congress is he's afraid they're going to do some regulation against him, right? He's not doing that to sell himself. So, when you're showing up privately for your people, you're on Instagram, whatever you want to do, I'm not saying you can never let your hair down, so to speak, But by and large, be who you're supposed to be. Play the role that you've carved out for yourself.
Yeah, what is it? I think the Italian have a quote that say, "Dressing well is a form of good manners."
There you go. I like that. It
Um,
shows respect for your audience, really.
yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Is that and also we talked about the visual aspect of your brand, but there is a message that's being sent. You talk about respect. As we're getting ready to wrap up, I'd like for you to kind of talk about maybe one or two key things that people can think about in terms of their message from the message master about one thing they could do right now to improve their messaging and how they are connecting with their world.
Well, that's a great question too. The first thing that everybody has to do is you've got to have a commitment to being prepared. I just did a post that went on LinkedIn and Instagram today. It's a clip from my online course that'll be out in the fall, and it was about elevator pitch and how so many people just literally the quote I used is, "Why would you wing it? Why would you just show up and not even have an idea about what it is you do and why it matters to us? Not why does it matter to you?" I'm happy to school anybody on the elements of an elevator pitch. But the very first thing you really have to do is you've got to sit yourself down, and whether you open up a Word document or actually, paper and pencil, and figure out what it is you really do at the very highest level. Why does your business exist? Why do you do what you do? And why do we care? Not why do you care? We know you want to make money, but why do we care? What is in it for us? What's different about what you do? What's a different approach than you have? And I'll say this is the second thing. A lot of people are under the impression, wow, if I could just come up with some unbelievable, great new item, then that's going to be enough just because it's so unique. And what I say to people who dream like that, and I love it. Look, I'm a dream product developer like that. Also, I'm always thinking, what would be the next great invention? What's going to be the thing that the sharks on Shark Tank, want to buy 25% of my company on? And I've had a couple of swings at things like that. But here's something you have to keep in mind. It's 2022, Frederick, and right up until today, July 28th. Guess what? We've lived without whatever your unbelievable product is right up until today. So chances are we probably can spend the next 2,000 years living without it. So just
Right.
the fact that it's new or different, not enough. Not enough. You've got to do something that is going to change the way we think about wherever we get that product or that resource from now. So here's the greatest example. Everybody probably right now has an attorney that they would call or an accountant that would do their taxes if they needed that. So if I'm an attorney or I'm an accountant and I want to be yours, I've got to do more than what your current attorney or accountant does for you now. Otherwise, I'm not giving you a reason to switch. It's not about the size of your firm. It's not about the services that you offer, although you could use that. You need to really think about the word differentiation. What makes you different? What's different about the way you do it than somebody else who's already doing it for us that would make us think, you know what? I want to try that. Sounds different enough than what I'm getting now. So those are two really good things to think about in terms of differentiation and being prepared.
I love it. I love it. You have really given us a ton of value, tons of things to think about, even just from your own personal story about how you leveraged your experience and this desire to do something bigger and more impactful and turn it into a whole company, and then making these transitions as well, the way that you're thinking about things. I love those shifts that you've given to us. Glenn, it's been a pleasure having you as a guest. I want for you to please let people know how they can reach you. You got, I think my bug may be covering your website there, but tell people how they can connect with you if they want to learn more about working with you or even just joining the class.
Super. Two quick things. I'll say this. I don't know how well this is showing up because of my green screen. This is my book, A Brand in Your Hand. That is just out. It's a brand new book. It is the business world's first fully rhyming and full color book on branding and messaging. That'll give you an idea about what it looks like on the inside. The entire book is written completely in rhyme. So just really quickly on elevator pitch. For your elevator pitch, I must persist. In just half a minute, please give us the gist of what you are offering and why it's so good. When you say it succinctly, it will be understood. So the whole book is written like a Dr. Seuss book, but it's all rhymes about business terms on branding and messaging and things like that. So I just like to let people know that's out there. It's up on Amazon. You can find it. It's simple to find me, Frederick. alwaysbeencreative.com. And of course, Glenn with 2 N's at alwaysbeencreative.com. Instagram, Glenn_Rudin_message_master, or LinkedIn, Glenn Rudin. Easy to find me. I love responding. I love meeting new people. If there's something that you want to know about branding, messaging, product development, and I can help you, reach out on my website. You can book a free 30-minute call on strategy or on speaking. All the items are up there. And I love meeting new people. So I welcome anybody who can hear my voice to do that and reach out to me, including you, Alea.
Yeah, so Alea needs to work on her messaging. Thank you so much, Glenn, for sharing all your insight and wisdom, sharing your story. And I'm hoping that you, if you're watching this, whether live or replay, that you will make sure you check Glenn out. You can learn a ton from him. Also, are you still in Clubhouse much anymore, or sometimes?
I'm not in as much, but I've got a room that I'm always in on Friday mornings, 8:30 Eastern Daylight Time, with the great Marvin Reed. I think you might know Marvin from Clubhouse. He's over there in the UK. 8:30 to 10, we do that. And there's a couple of rooms that I'm in the process of developing now. To try to come out there and bring it. I will definitely let you know, Fred, because I'd love to have you in any of those rooms and provide your kind of great knowledge and feedback that you do. But yeah, you can find me at different times on Clubhouse as well.
Perfect. Glenn, it's been a pleasure having you. We're really grateful for all the information you've shared. Thanks to all of you who've stopped by for a second, a minute, or for the entire hour. If you're watching this live, then let us know your thoughts, your comments. If you're watching this in a replay, drop a hashtag replay and let us know. As always, like, subscribe, share. Let's get the message out. Let's continue to build this world of entrepreneurship and impact for people so they can show up with intention, to be professional, and have a message that matters. For Glenn Rudin and my daughter, Alea, I'm Frederick Douglass Bussey, ever forward.